2,000 years, the Acropolis has dominated the skyline over Athens. The ravages of war, religious desecration and cultural looting have failed to diminish its hold over our imagination. In the secrets of its ruins lie the ideals of the golden age of Greece, the philosophy of Socrates, the geometry of Pythagoras, the birth of democracy, and the Parthenon itself, the most influential building in Western civilization.
These are public buildings in the greatest city of its time, a city that had the power and had the wealth and had the navy and had the wherewithal and the artisans to do what they did. And when they were gathered together, they were not only competitive with each other and had to work and wanted to work together through that competitive spirit, but they were also competitive with art itself. They thought to themselves, we are as good as any artists have ever been, and we must show the world as they knew it what they could do. And there was no compromise.
The boldness and ambition of the Acropolis was funded by the spoils of war, a war that determined the fate of Greece. In 480 BC, Athens lay in ruins, conquered by the seemingly unstoppable Persian Empire. At sea, the Persian armada of 800 vessels bore down on the retreating Greek fleet, who were hopelessly outnumbered. On the night before the inevitable battle, an owl, symbol of their protective goddess Athena, was seen flying through the night sky. Inspired by this good omen, the Greek navy daringly engaged and defeated the Persian fleet at the Battle of Salamis. In one of the great naval victories of history, the Greeks sank 200 enemy ships while losing only 40 of their own. The Persian threat had been overcome. The unexpected victory heralded a new period of stability for Athens and her allies. The golden age of Greece was born. A permanent alliance of Aegean city-states was formed, called the Delian League, to defend Greece's newfound independence from the Persian menace. One man, Pericles of Athens, emerged as its undisputed leader. His ambition was simple: to make Athens its political and cultural capital, effectively creating the Athenian Empire. The Acropolis was to be the masterstroke of Pericles' power-broking, a monumental declaration of Athens' dominance in the New World Order. In 447 BC, he committed the new empire and its wealth to its construction. He brought together three unique artistic talents: Phidias the sculptor, and architects Ictinius and Kallikrates. Together they imagined a complex of temples and public places to be built along classical ideals, but exceeding them in scale and perfection. The entrance to the Acropolis, the symbolic barrier between the secular and sacred worlds, would be through an extravagant staircase and gateway, the Propylaea. To the north, they would rebuild the Erechtheion, a temple named after Erechtheus, the ancient god-king of Athens, who the poet Homer described as being Athena's own foster child. Steeped in mythology and legend, the Erechtheion would be its most religious site, where all the deities that dominated Athenian life could be worshipped in one place. Facing the Erechtheion to the south would be the Parthenon, meaning House of the Virgin, a palace fit for their goddess Athena and an impregnable treasury for the wealth of Athens, guarded over by the goddess herself. Completing the complex would be the temple Athena Nike. Celebrating military victories, it looks out over the Bay of Salamis, the scene of their great deliverance from the Persians. Nike is the Greek word for victory. Pericles' Acropolis was to be the focal point of Athenian life. Religious processions would enter through the Propylaea and climax at the Erechtheion. On its many altars, hundreds of cattle would be sacrificed to Athena, Poseidon, and Zeus. Sporting games would augment the festivals. Grand feasts and banquets would take place on its wooded slopes, a time for young girls of marriageable age to be introduced to male society. On the broad plazas between temples, military parades would celebrate Greek power. At Athena Nike, their war dead would be honored and protection sought for those still fighting for the city. Uniquely accessible by its own staircase, Athenians could visit the temple whenever they wanted, without having to pass through the ceremonial gates of the Propylaea. Every detail of the Acropolis, its masonry, sculptures, and painted decorations, were to be the finest ever created. But Pericles' power was not dictatorial. His grand aspirations for the Acropolis were not his alone to approve.
The entire building program that Pericles proposed and every individual project had to be approved by the Democratic Assembly. And to a very large degree then, the monuments on the Acropolis, though perhaps the idea of one man, Pericles, nonetheless were the work of the democracy as a whole.
Athenian democracy was developed around 500 years BC. All free men born of two Athenian parents qualified for citizenship and voting rights in the assembly. Though it empowered only a tiny minority, 40,000 men out of a population of 500,000, it was a pure democracy. Every state's decision was voted on by the entire assembly. The polling system was simple: a black stone for no, a white one for yes. At first, the assembly opposed Pericles' plans for the Acropolis. The citizens simply balked at the huge cost. In response, Pericles threatened to pay for the project himself and give it his own name. With that moment of bravado, the opposition crumbled. From then on, no cost would be too great or level of endeavor too hard. The Acropolis became a symbol of Athenian civic pride, and the Parthenon its crowning glory. Only 10 years earlier, a huge temple had been built to Zeus at Olympia. Athenian honor and Pericles' ambition demanded that the Parthenon be bigger. Its foundations were to be built over the ruins of an earlier Parthenon that had been razed to the ground by the Persians. Pericles' Parthenon would expunge that shame and declare victory by becoming the most majestic construction ever built, a palace fit for a goddess, a masterpiece of geometry and proportion without equal. Marshalled by Pericles, the Athenian assembly voted for every aspect of the Acropolis to express the ideals of their revolutionary society. The entire complex would be built of white marble, not just for its ostentation, but also for its symbolism.
Marble for the Acropolis was a local stone, and pure white stone is seen as the representation of a pure society, in this a pure democratic society.
The marble was quarried at Pentelicon, 14 miles from the site. Like a giant diamond, it was quarried by exploiting the weaknesses of almost invisible flaws in the rock. A 40-ton block would have taken 10 men 10 days to prise from the bedrock. Only 50% of the quarried stone was eventually fit for construction. In total, 180,000 tons were removed from the quarry at Pentelicon to build the Acropolis. Chiseled to size at the quarry, the final finishing would be carried out at the Acropolis. On the site itself, the Greek master stonemasons created these miracles of stone without the use of mortar or cement. The strength and durability of the buildings was achieved by the precision with which each stone was cut. The joins between some blocks are less than 1/20th of a millimeter. The fine black lines visible are not cracks, but the staining of bacteria built up over 2,500 years. To actually see the gap in a join would require magnification of 60. Each stone slotted into position and was locked into place by an iron clamp. Like a giant 3D jigsaw, the buildings of the Acropolis achieved a precision of building never accomplished before, or surpassed since. In choosing marble as the exclusive material for the Acropolis, they challenged themselves to create a set of buildings without equal. An ambition that would push Greek science and technology to its limits. Amazingly, they worked without architectural plans or drawings as we understand them today. Instead, they were guided by a set of codes and principles dictated by the art of geometry. For the architects of Athens' golden age, the mastery of geometry was a magical discovery that revealed the glories of nature. The Acropolis of Kellicotti and Ictinius is a startling celebration of their new intellectual power.
The Acropolis shows a maturity of Greek mathematics and also an appreciation of geometrical ideas. This is a work of utmost importance in that it lays the foundations of logic into mathematics and enables us to use this as a tool to explore the unknown.
By creating the Acropolis as an exercise in living geometry, its builders expressed their religious beliefs. This link between religious traditions and mathematics is powerfully revealed at the climax of the most sacred event in the Athenian religious year, the Parthenon festival that celebrated the birth of Athena. The festival built to its dramatic conclusion with a mass procession from the outlying fields of Athens to the Acropolis. Young maidens carried the peplos, a ceremonial cloth to adorn the sculptures of Athena. Sacrificial cattle walked beside the worshippers. Squadrons of cavalry escorted them as well. For 5 days the procession swelled in number until all of Athenian life was reflected in its massed ranks. Finally it climbed the monumental staircase of the Propylaea. Entering the sacred space of the Acropolis through its gateways delivered worshippers to a magical point in the complex. From this point, the entire layout is determined. It is centered on the line of the sun as it passes over the site from east to west. Kellicotti and Ictinius positioned every key building on lines of sight radiating from this single point. The lines are not randomly set. They obey the codes of the 12-part system Greeks used to express the divinity of the universe. The system divided a 360-degree panorama into 12 equal sections of 30 degrees each. The key buildings of the Acropolis are placed within these confines to dramatic effect.
An observer from the vantage point, which is the propylaea in this case, would see three-quarter views of the various buildings and in fact see the maximum possible surface area of the Parthenon from this point.
The religious symbolism of the 12-part system is also at work. 60 degrees, the angle attributed to Athena by followers of Pythagoras, contains both the Parthenon and the Erechtheion. The equilateral triangle, Athena's geometrical symbol, is also directly imposed on the Acropolis's layout. Through the unique combination of geometry and religious symbolism, the optimum position of the Parthenon's facade is set.
The proportions of the Parthenon are the square root of 5 to 1. In other words, the ratio of the longer side to the smaller side is the square root of 5.
The square root of 5 fascinated the Greeks because it's an irrational number. No number, however long, can ever precisely determine its value or even discern a pattern in its decimal places. This gap between the limits of mortal knowledge and the mysteries of nature entranced the Greeks. It was here that they grasped the limits of their imagination in the face of the genius that created the universe. The square root of 5 to 1 is a divine proportion for a divine building.
The rectangle ACDE now has the proportions of the Parthenon.
This pursuit of divine architecture carries through to the facade of the Parthenon as well. The Greeks believed that any shape had a natural area of greatest beauty, and they calculated a formula to define it. The golden section, or mean, deduces from the set width of the facade the perfect position of the columns. The halfway point is rotated upright to create a right-angle triangle. The same length intersects the longest side, creating a new length, which when rotated back down to the horizontal, defines the golden section of the facade.
Amazingly enough, we find that there is a column positioned at exactly this point, and there is a symmetrically positioned column on the right.
From the positioning of the central columns, the rest of the facade is created. Guided by the golden mean, Callicrates and Actinius broke with tradition and created a facade of 8 columns, not 6.
In theory, a craftsman could begin with a given length of rope and certain proportions in mind and come up with the different lengths required in building the Parthenon.
But the beauty of the Parthenon is not dependent on the golden mean alone. It is the product of subtle optical distortion designed to fool the human eye and enhance its beauty. To the observer, these columns may seem perfect, but their perfection actually lies in their imperfection.
It's been said that although the Parthenon is constructed of vertical supports and horizontal loads, that there is in fact not a single straight line in the building. That's not entirely true, but in fact virtually no vertical line or horizontal line lacks a subtle curve or a subtle swelling or a slight inclination. These various deviations from the straight and the horizontal and the perpendicular are known as optical refinements.
Viewed from the gateway of the propylaea, the Parthenon presents the image of a flawless structure. But not one of the visible lines on the building is straight. Actinius employed these optical illusions so the building would not appear distorted when viewed from ground level. To stop the long sides of the building appearing to sag, Actinius made them rise up in the middle. The center is 11 centimeters higher than the ends. At the base, the deviation of the pure horizontal can be clearly seen.
We know that the architects of the Parthenon tried in a rather dramatic way to refine the optical illusions, the golden section, the idea of what we see within the frame, if you can think of it that way, almost the rectangle that our eyes see more in focus here than perhaps to the sides, is something that as you look at the facade of the Parthenon straight on, there would be some distortion. So they tried to rearrange it in both the shaft of the column and the tilt, if you will, of the external columns, something that would correct that distortion as our eyes are seeing those a little less well than the ones in the center.
The sides of the massive columns not only taper towards the top, but also swell outwards 1/3 of the way up. This deliberate distortion counteracts the thinning effect of perspective over the column's great height. Without it, the columns would appear to narrow unattractively at the center. The degree of precision needed to produce such subtlety entirely by hand is almost impossible to grasp. Nor are the columns perfectly perpendicular. They all slope imperceptibly inwards. If the facade were extended upwards 4,800 meters, its columns would eventually meet. The side columns are inclined even further, meeting at 2,400 meters. The corner columns have an extra refinement. They're fractionally wider, the extra width compensating for the slimming effect of being silhouetted against the sky.
The optical refinements enliven the building. They create a tension between what we expect to see, perfectly straight lines, perfectly straight horizontals, and what we do see, swellings, curves. And this friction, or this tension between our expectation and what we see adds visual interest. It adds intrigue. It makes the temple seem more alive and more appealing to our eye.
The completed Parthenon is a timeless testament to the genius of Actinius and Kallikratis's unique vision. Perfection through deliberate imperfection. Yet it was the Erechtheion, not the Parthenon, that was the ultimate focus of the Panathenaian procession. The temple honored the city's mythological past and the diversity of different gods central to Greek religion. It is the spiritual home for the cult of Erechtheus, the god-king who Athena had raised as her own child, centuries before the Golden Age. Built up from the ancient foundations of earlier temples, the Erechtheion was a unique place where the city's mortal history and divinity came together.
Looks at the Erechtheion, it looks like 3 buildings to me. And for that I love it, because we are so criticized today when we see a modern object, and sometimes clients or cities or governments think that that object is perfect and never change it. Well, architecture has never worked that way. Architecture is elastic, it's plastic. It has a sense of growing and changing over time, and that's what one looks at in terms of Erechtheum, how marvelous it is, and you can't imagine it as a pure object. You have its pure object adjacent to it in the Parthenon.
The unorthodox floor plan accommodates distinct areas of worship for different deities. The upper portion was dedicated to Athena, while the lower levels had altars dedicated to Zeus, the king of the gods, and to Poseidon, god of the sea. Its majestic main entrance protected a stone believed to have been struck by Poseidon's trident. On religious high days, the temple was the center of activity, as thousands made offerings to the gods that dominated their lives, and the blood from sacrifices would have run freely from its many altars across the marble floors. Its most sacred shrine housed the statue of Athena Polias, the guardian of the city. The ceremonial peplos was draped over this sacred statue as the concluding act of the Parthenon festival.
An Athena who was represented in the form of an olive wood statue that was so old that not even the Athenians themselves knew where it had come from, and said that it had fallen down from heaven.
The most renowned feature of the building is the group of caryatids supporting the roof of the temple's southern porch. Roman art historian Vitruvius recorded that they represent enslaved priestesses from the island of Caryae, who had sided with the Persians during their war with Greece. Frozen in stone and facing in submission towards the Parthenon, the caryatids are a permanent reminder to future generations to be loyal to Athena and Athens. The sculptures are credited to Alcamenes, but in their exquisite detail and powerful storytelling is the guiding hand of Phidias, his tutor and undisputed genius of Greek sculpture. And it is with Phidias' own work that the sculptural significance of the Acropolis is fully realized. Behind the massive bronze doors of the Parthenon's inner sanctum, he created Athens' priceless treasure, the most expensive sculpture ever created. Today, the Parthenon dominates the ruins of the Acropolis. Its appearance as a classic Greek temple belies its real purpose. Behind massive bronze doors that protected its inner sanctum was the wealth of Athens. The colossal statue of Athena created by Phidias dominated the treasure room. "11 meters high, her flesh was carved of ivory, her armor of pure gold."
We're told in our sources that the amount of gold that was used for the statue alone amounted to 40 or 44 talents of gold. A talent is an ancient Athenian unit of measure, equivalent more or less to 57, 58 pounds.
At today's gold prices, Athena's armor would be worth £8 million. Guarded by Athena and a permanent garrison of troops, the rest of Athens' treasure was stored here, often donated to the city in the form of votive offerings to the goddess. The giant statue has now been lost to history, along with the wealth that funded Pericles' grand ambition. But the Parthenon's greatest riches, the craftsmanship and beauty of its sculpture, live on.
The Parthenon has been called a Sculptors Temple, and I think that is a true characterization in many ways. First, this building was the richest sculpturally of any building that had ever been built in Greece before.
Phidias, the master sculptor of the age, oversaw every detail of the Parthenon's unique sculptural wealth. Working outwards from Athena, he exploited every opportunity to decorate the entire building. The sculptures were not just decorative. They reminded Athenians of their history and reaffirmed their exalted place in the universe. The best preserved of these sculptures are held in the British Museum. They include sections of the Parthenon Frieze, considered by many to be the best low-relief sculpture ever carved. The detail achieved with a maximum depth of 5 centimeters is remarkable.
The Parthenon Frieze is the best sculpture to survive from the best period of Greek art, and if it's remarkable now, it was certainly so in its day, not least for the sheer scale of the thing. Carved 3 foot 3 inches high, it ran for 524 feet around all 4 sides of the temple. In the frieze, nothing is more glorious than the stream of mounted horsemen that flow down much of its long north and south sides. When Pericles took over the running of the Athenian state, he inherited a cavalry with no more than 300 men, but at the time of his death, he had increased it to 1,000. The challenge to Phidias, whom we credit with the design of the frieze, was to convey a sense of the thrill of standing on the sidelines of the Athenian parade ground, watching Pericles' cavalry of 1,000 ride by, and also to capture something of the natural grace and rhythm of the riders. And one of the tricks he used was to create marker figures placed at intervals down the frieze who would indicate the 10-fold division into the tribal units. So here is one such figure. We see that he is placed nearest the spectator and not overlapped by any other rider in his group, but he overlaps the figure to his right, who overlaps the figure to his right, who overlaps the figure to his right, who overlaps the figure to his right, until we reach the figure, this one here, looking back over his shoulder, who is 7 in from the front and who marks the furthest point away from the spectator.
Dominating the exterior, the eastern pediment portrayed the birth of Athena. Much has been destroyed, but the fragments that remain give us a tantalizing glimpse of their original narrative power. Almost certainly painted in dynamic colors, they capture the very moment of Athena's birth. Horses pulling the sun god Helios announce the beginning of the day. Set in the acutest angle of the pediment, they are mirrored by horses on the opposite angle.
To balance, the chariot of the sun god Helios rising in one corner of the pediment, the chariot of the moon goddess Selene was shown sinking beneath the horizon of the other. Here is one of her team of 4 horses. We see how brilliantly the sculptor has articulated the different elements of the face. The 2-tier of the spiky mane, the great roll of muscle on the neck, the plate of the cheekbone and the trumpet of the muzzle. But unlike the horses of Helios, this horse is tired. It is at the end of its journey. It has spent the night drawing the moon goddess and her chariot across the vast canopy of the night sky. Its nostrils flare, its jaw gapes, the veins stand out, the eye bulges, the ear is pinned back as it makes one last effort at the end of its labours to find home and the peace of the stable.
Circling all 4 sides of the Parthenon, sculptured panels record key moments of Greek legend.
I'm standing by a metope, a panel carved in very high relief, which is one of 92 that ran around the outside of the temple above the columns. All the metopes of the Parthenon showed scenes of mythological battle. On the south side, from which this one comes, centaurs, part man, part horse, fight it out with male Lapiths, a race who lived in northern Greece, the area toward Thessaly. Here, the human figure has fallen to the ground line and now lies supine with life seemingly ebbing from his limbs, while over him rears the centaur in an explosion of arrogant triumph as he claims the rest of the picture, and as he does so punches the air, and you can see a skin of a panther which he has slain and is now an emblem of his wild nature.
The message of the sculptures is twofold. The pediments and cavalry friezes express devotion to Athena and the military strength she blessed them with, while the legends of battle serve as a memorial, reminding Athenians, lest they forget, of the barbaric past from which they had been freed. With the Parthenon, Pericles' vision to create a monument celebrating victory and revenge had been finally realized. In his biography of Pericles, Plutarch, the Greek historian, imagined the immediate impact of the whole Acropolis on its citizens.
The most wondrous thing of all was the speed of their work. For while it was thought that each one of these works would take many generations to reach an end, all of them were completed at the height of a single administration. For which reason the works of Pericles are to be particularly wondered at, being made in so short a time for all time. For in beauty each one immediately became ancient, yet it seems fresh and newly made even now.
But in reality, these glory days were short-lived. 20 years after their initiation, work on the Acropolis came to a halt. By 434 BC, civil war with the Spartans had intensified, and the Acropolis was never completely finished. These unfinished stones at the base of the Propylaea show where the work was dramatically curtailed. 5 years later, Pericles died of the plague that decimated the city's population. In 404 BC, Athens was finally crushed by the Spartan army. The Golden Age was over, and with it, the brief flowering of democracy. Athens would never achieve the same dominance again. When the Roman Empire annexed Greece, the Acropolis was preserved as a monument of human greatness. But with the advent of Christianity, the Parthenon was converted into a church. Many of the sculptures were defiled to erase the memory of its pagan past. In turn, the city fell to the Ottoman Empire. The Christian church was converted into a mosque, complete with minaret, and its statues were further defiled. The faces of the Erechtheian caryatids were sheared off, even though the Sultan used the building as his harem. Yet even after 1,000 years of cultural vandalism, the Acropolis remained largely intact. But by 1687 AD, the Ottomans were at war with the Venetians, who lay siege to Athens. The Ottoman commander stored his gunpowder within the supposed safety of the mosque, the Parthenon. On the 24th of September, the Venetian general, Francisco Morosini, turned his cannon onto the Parthenon. In a continuous artillery onslaught, lasting from noon until nightfall, the Parthenon suffered 800 direct hits. The inevitable happened. One shot penetrated the roof and ignited the gunpowder. In a split second, the Parthenon was damaged beyond repair. Over 300 years later, only the latest innovations in archaeology and restoration can grasp the miracles of design and masonry destroyed. Today, as never before, the work of restorers reveal those secrets. The damage from Venetian cannons would be compounded by 2 centuries of neglect and cultural looting. Some of the marble was even crushed to turn into cement. But at the turn of the 19th century, a revival of interest in classical architecture and ideals brought the Acropolis to cultural prominence once more. Aristocratic tourists from Northern Europe visited the site in increasing numbers and helped themselves to hundreds of carvings and marble fragments as souvenirs. In 1801, the Turks granted the British ambassador, Lord Elgin, permission to salvage artifacts from the site. Elgin took them at their word and set about the mass transportation of the Acropolis back to Britain. The pediment sculptures, cavalry friezes and Battle of the Centaurs were the prize pieces of his collection. The transportation alone cost Lord Elgin £75,000, the equivalent of £3 million today. He hired an Italian landscape painter, Giovanni Battista Lucieri, to remove the sculptures for him. Lucieri's letters revealed the brutality underlying Lord Elgin's supposed rescue mission.
I should require 3 or 4 saws 20 foot in length to saw a great bas relief that we could not transport unless we reduce its weight. Happily it broke in the middle in a straight line at a place where there was no work.
Here on the ground we found some remains of the back of the sculptures from the area of the Zoophoros that Lord Elgin take from the monument. And here you can see how he cut the sculpture a thick, not a very thick slab due to the transportation, difficulties of the transportation of that period. So they used saw of this kind, pouring sand in the gap as they are moving. And they cut it both sides and they break it finally.
The damage caused by Lucieri has more recently been compounded by well-meaning but inexpert archaeologists. In 1902, restorers decided to replace the metal securing clamps that had survived for centuries. The 20th century replacements were supposed to be a preemptive protective measure, but in fact they corroded within decades, cracking the marble they were attempting to protect. This act of folly reveals the high quality of ancient metallurgy. The ancient clamps were the combination of 2 different strengths of iron, beaten together and then coated with lead to prevent corrosion, a level of artistry the restorers of 1902 had failed to match up to. Today, Nicholas Togonidis and his team are replacing the 20th century corroded clamps with titanium versions. These new clamps will not rust and have exactly the same breaking strain as the ancient Greek originals. When put under pressure by earth tremors, the clamps will break and not the marble. In another flawed restoration project, an archaeologist dismantled this column to repair its cracked surface. On completion, he replaced the drums in the wrong order, destroying their original beauty in the process. Such badly conducted restorations have forced today's archaeologists to evaluate every stone on the Acropolis site. More than 70,000 pieces of marble have been catalogued, and restorers now believe they know where each piece fits. And the more they understand about the Acropolis, the more the genius of its original builders is revealed. 1,000 nameless artisans who created this unique monument entirely by hand and without the use of mortar or cement. To preserve the buildings, restorers must match that precision, an endeavor that pushes modern technology to its limits. Plaster casts are made of broken sections. From these casts, exact copies of the missing pieces are carved by machines, which then produce the 3D mirror image in marble. Where machines fail, they must resort to carving by hand. Laboriously, a perfect fit is created, and another piece of the Acropolis jigsaw fits into place. Such restoration work is fighting a losing battle to the greatest threat the Acropolis has ever faced. Lord Elgin, cannon fire, the sensibilities of Christian and Muslim cleric pale in significance when compared to the destructive power of acid rain. Nowhere is the impact of this man-made disaster more powerfully revealed than in the destruction of the temple of Athena Nike. Encased in scaffold, the temple is simply disintegrating as acid rain dissolves the marble. The temple of victory is now an eerie temple of defeat in the face of man's poison. Restorers are undecided as to how the damage can be halted. Some propose covering the entire site in a thin layer of silicon, but the long-term effects of this drastic measure are unknown, and for the time being the stones of the Acropolis remain exposed. Each year, another layer of history is washed away. If the impact of acid rain is not solved soon, the Acropolis will be lost forever.
I think it's probably its sublime quality that gives us a kind of pause and to know that we are within this very romantic, wonderfully proportioned, perfectly constructed artifact of man that today haunts us.
No one was more aware of this opportunity for a place in history than Pericles himself. Addressing the mourners of Athens' war dead, he justified their sacrifice as follows.
These men, your sons and husbands, are dead. But look at what they died for. They died for Athens. And what is that but a city which uniquely calls upon its people to be citizens, not subjects, which celebrates philosophy, science, and reason, and which allows its people to live well while exercising both their duty and right to be fully human. Future ages will wonder at us, even as the present age wonders at us now.